There is a particular kind of wilderness, not just of stone and sand, but of the human heart, where the echoes of past mistakes carve deeper canyons than any river. It is in this internal desert that we often wander, convinced that by outrunning the horizon, we can outrun the memory. But memory, like a relentless shadow, clings to every step, every breath, until the very air we breathe tastes of regret. For 3 long years, Emma had been a ghost haunting her own life, a solitary figure etched against the vast, indifferent canvas of the American Southwest. The Arizona's sun, merciless and unforgiving, felt like a constant, burning reminder of her own judgment, scorched into her soul. Canyon Ridge. The name itself was a brand, searing hot, a crucible where her overconfidence had melted into catastrophe, where poor choices had led to a tragedy that splintered lives, including her own, into irreparable fragments. A hiking group, a storm no one saw coming, a path she had sworn was safe. The memories were a physical weight, a backpack she could never set down, heavier than any gear she carried. She drifted, not towards any destination, but away from all of them, away from any place where human connection might demand a piece of her shattered self. Her campfires were small, her movements silent, her gaze always scanning the periphery, not for danger, but for people. Any sign of another soul would send her deeper into the trackless wastes, a self-imposed exile driven by the gnawing certainty that she was a poison, a harbinger of ill fortune, unworthy of companionship, incapable of responsibility. The vastness of the desert was her chosen penance, its stark beauty a mirror to her desolation. The endless horizon offered no escape, only a perpetual reminder of the chasm she had fallen into. She had become an expert in avoidance, in the art of vanishing, convinced that the only way to prevent further harm was to never engage, never lead, never trust her own instincts again. It was in this crucible of self-punishment, under a sky that seemed too immense for human grief, that the impossible happened. She was traversing a particularly desolate stretch of sun-baked earth, the kind of terrain that whispered of ancient, forgotten spirits when she saw it. A dark, still lump against the ochre dust, barely distinguishable from a tumbleweed at first glance. Her first instinct, honed by years of isolation, was to bypass it to maintain her distance. But a flicker of something long dormant within her, held her. As she drew closer, the lump resolved into the unmistakable form of a dog. A border collie, its usually vibrant coat matted with blood and grime, its body still, save for the shallow, ragged breaths that barely stirred its ribs. One leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, a deep gash weeping silently into the sand. Its eyes, when they finally flickered open, held an intelligence, a depth of suffering that pierced through Emma's carefully constructed armor. They weren't accusatory nor pleading, but simply present, a quiet, knowing acknowledgement that resonated with a loneliness Emma understood all too well. For a moment, she stood frozen, the old familiar voice of caution screaming in her mind. Asterisk, don't get involved. Don't take on another burden. You only bring ruin. Asterisk, but the dog's gaze, steady and unwavering, held her. It was a mirror, reflecting not her guilt, but something else, something she hadn't seen in years, an innate capacity for compassion that had been buried under layers of shame. Slowly, tentatively, Emma knelt. Her hands, usually so adept at self-sufficiency, trembled slightly as she examined the wound. It was bad, but not fatal. Not yet. She cleaned it as best she could with her dwindling water supply, tearing strips from her own shirt to fashion a crude bandage, splinting the leg with 2 sturdy sticks she found nearby. The dog, remarkably, didn't whimper or struggle, only watched her with those ancient eyes, a silent testament to trust. When she offered a piece of dried jerky, it ate with a cautious gratitude that spoke volumes. She couldn't leave it. The thought, once unthinkable, now felt inevitable. She named it Journey. Perhaps it was a foolish act, another attachment she would surely regret, another potential failure. Yet, as she carefully helped the injured dog to its feet, supporting its weight, a strange lightness, unfamiliar and unsettling, stirred within her. Journey, despite its injury, immediately began to move, not aimlessly, but with a clear, deliberate intent. It hobbled forward, pausing only to look back at Emma, its head cocked as if to say, "Come on, we have a path." And then it turned its gaze to the northeast, towards a hazy, distant silhouette on the horizon, the nascent, iconic formations of Monument Valley. Emma, who had spent years fleeing any form of direction, found herself following. Journey, with an uncanny, almost supernatural precision, led her not through the most direct route, but through a labyrinth of arroyos and hidden passes, seemingly knowing where the most stable ground lay, where the rare, almost miraculous pockets of hidden water could be found. It was as if the desert itself whispered its secrets to this wounded creature. Emma, who prided herself on her wilderness skills, found herself marveling at the dog's impossible knowledge, its silent, unwavering conviction. This was no ordinary animal. This was a guide, a silent, furry compass pointing not just across the desert, but toward something Emma hadn't realized she was desperate for, a new direction. With every painful, hobbling step Journey took, every glance back that urged her onward, Emma felt the rigid shell of her isolation begin to crack, a terrifying, exhilarating tremor of possibility in the vast, unforgiving landscape. The journey had begun, not of her own choosing, but led by a creature she had saved, a creature that now, inexplicably, seemed to be saving her. The journey had begun, not of her own choosing, but led by a creature she had saved, a creature that now, inexplicably, seemed to be saving her. Emma, the self-proclaimed expert in avoidance, found herself in the bewildering position of being guided by a four-legged oracle. The desert, once a canvas for her desolation, was now a shared path, its vastness subtly altered by the presence of a limping border collie. Every step Journey took was a tiny chisel, chipping away at the reinforced concrete of Emma's solitude. At first, skepticism was a hard knot in her stomach. How could this injured animal, barely able to walk, possess such uncanny foresight? She'd spent years studying topography, weather patterns, survival skills honed to a razor's edge. Yet, Journey, with a simple tilt of its head, would veer off what Emma instinctively knew was the correct path, leading her instead through narrow, winding arroyos that seemed to lead nowhere. Each time, just as doubt threatened to consume her, the dog would halt, nose twitching, and then scratch at a patch of dry earth. Beneath, miraculously, a small, seeping spring would reveal itself, a lifeline in the parched wilderness. Or it would navigate a seemingly impassable rockfall, finding a barely visible ledge, a path Emma's trained I had completely missed. It was baffling, humbling, and utterly disorienting to her rigid worldview. The sun beat down with relentless intensity, but Journey seemed to know the precise hours to move, when to rest in the sliver of shade offered by a lone mesquite, when to conserve energy. Emma, despite her internal resistance, found herself falling into the rhythm of the dog's inexplicable wisdom. Her compass, her maps, her years of hard-won knowledge felt like obsolete relics in the face of Journey's silent, instinctual guidance. A strange peace began to seep into her, a quiet surrender to the unknown. She wasn't leading, wasn't responsible for the next turn, the next water source, the next safe passage. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of ultimate accountability was lifted, even if only partially, by the improbable presence of a dog. As the days bled into a week, the landscape began its slow, majestic transformation. The distant, hazy silhouettes on the horizon grew sharper, more defined, resolving into the colossal, unmistakable formations of Monument Valley. The iconic red rock sentinels, rising like ancient gods from the desert floor, were a sight that stole the breath from Emma's lungs. She had seen countless photographs, read endless descriptions, but nothing prepared her for the sheer, raw majesty of it. These were not mere geological formations. They were monuments to time, to resilience, to an enduring beauty that dwarfed human concerns, human sorrows. For a fleeting moment, the searing brand of Canyon Ridge faded, replaced by an overwhelming sense of awe. But Journey did not stop at the valley's edge. With renewed purpose, it led Emma deeper into the labyrinthine heart of the formations, past towering mesas and slender spires that cast long, dancing shadows across the sandy floor. The silence here was profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the soft crunch of their footsteps. It was a silence that spoke of eternity, a sacred space where the very air felt charged with ancient energy. Emma found herself talking to Journey, soft murmurs of gratitude, of wonder, of a tentative, fragile hope. She recounted tales of her youth, stories of forgotten dreams, things she hadn't dared voice to another soul in years. The dog, her silent confidant, would occasionally glance back, its intelligent eyes seeming to listen, to understand. The bond between them deepened with every mile. Emma shared her meager rations, carefully tended to Journey's still healing leg, and found herself anticipating its subtle cues, its almost imperceptible shifts in direction. She had always believed that true connection was a vulnerability she could not afford, a weakness that had led to her greatest failure. Yet, with Journey, there was no judgment, no expectation, only a shared existence, a mutual reliance forged in the crucible of the wild. This dog, this unexpected companion, was teaching her to trust again, not just in another living being, but in the possibility of something good emerging from the wreckage of her life. One evening, as the last fiery streaks of sunset painted the vast sky, casting the red rocks in hues of impossible violet and gold, Journey stopped. Not with the investigative pause it usually took before finding water or a path, but with a deliberate, expectant halt. It turned its head, not towards Emma, but toward a faint plume of smoke rising in the distance, barely visible against the twilight. And then, carried on the gentle evening breeze, Emma heard it. The faint, almost imperceptible sound of human voices, a distant murmur that broke the profound silence of Monument Valley. Her heart, which had begun to soften, now seized with a familiar terror. People, after so long, after so carefully avoiding them, Journey had led her directly to them. The old fears resurfaced, thick and suffocating. The fear of recognition, of judgment, of the inevitable questions that would pry open the wounds of Canyon Ridge. She wanted to turn back, to melt into the shadows, to resume her solitary penance. But Journey, sensing her hesitation, nudged her hand with its wet nose, then looked towards the smoke, its eyes unwavering, filled with a quiet insistence. It was an unspoken plea, a silent command. This wasn't just a random destination, it was the destination. Emma looked at the dog, then back at the distant wisp of smoke, and then at the magnificent, ancient formations that cradled them. She had followed Journey this far, through impossible terrain, trusting in an intuition that defied logic. Could she turn back now? Could she abandon this quiet, steadfast creature who had shown her glimmers of a life beyond guilt? The thought of leaving Journey, of severing this fragile new connection, felt more painful than facing any human scrutiny. The desert had stripped her bare, but Journey had begun to reclothe her, not in armor, but in a tentative skin of hope. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Emma squared her shoulders. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her gut, but it was now accompanied by something else, a flicker of resolve, a nascent courage she hadn't known she possessed. She had spent 3 years fleeing, but perhaps true healing wasn't found in escape, but in facing the very things that terrified her. Journey, her unlikely guide, had led her not just to Monument Valley, but to a crossroads within herself. The settlement, whatever it was, whoever was there, represented an end to her self-imposed exile, a re-entry into a world she had sworn off. It was a terrifying prospect, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. And that, in itself, was a victory. as they walked towards the distant glow of a campfire. Emma knew this was no longer just Journey's path. It was theirs. And for the first time, she wasn't just running away. She was walking toward something. The distant murmur of voices grew steadily louder as Emma and Journey drew closer to the settlement. It wasn't a cacophony, but a gentle hum, a symphony of human existence that grated against Emma's years of deliberate silence. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of old anxieties. Every step towards the flickering firelight felt like a step back into the very world she had so desperately fled, a world filled with judgment, with expectations, with the unbearable weight of her past. Yet, Journey trotted forward with an unyielding purpose, its tail now wagging with a slow, confident swing, its limp barely noticeable in its excitement. The dog's unwavering resolve was a tether, pulling Emma forward when every instinct screamed at her to turn and run. She focused on Journey, on the soft brush of its fur against her leg, on the quiet strength emanating from the creature who had become her unlikely anchor. As they crested a final, low ridge, the full scope of the settlement unfolded before them, nestled in a natural amphitheater carved by the ancient red rocks. It wasn't a sprawling town, but a collection of sturdy, well-maintained structures, a communal tent, several smaller canvas shelters, and a few more permanent-looking adobe-style buildings blending seamlessly with the ochre landscape. Smoke curled lazily from a central fire pit, around which figures moved with an easy camaraderie. Children's laughter, light and free, drifted on the evening air, a sound Emma hadn't heard in years, a sound that pierced the armor around her heart with unexpected tenderness. Lanterns cast soft, inviting glows, illuminating faces that seemed etched with stories, yet also with a profound sense of peace. These weren't the transient, desperate eyes of rootless wanderers. These were people who had found a haven. Journey, with a low, excited bark, broke free of Emma's side and bounded towards the fire, its arrival immediately drawing attention. A tall, broad-shouldered man, his hair streaked with silver and his face weathered by the sun, rose from his seat. He moved with a quiet dignity, a gentle strength in his bearing that was immediately apparent. His eyes, a startling shade of blue, met Emma's across the flickering firelight, and in them she saw no judgment, no suspicion, only a profound, welcoming calm. This was David Harrison. He knelt, extending a hand to Journey, who licked it enthusiastically. "Well now, look what the desert dragged in," he murmured, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "And who's your friend, old boy?" He looked back at Emma, a soft, inviting smile touching his lips. Emma felt a tremor run through her. This was it, the moment of re-entry. Her throat was dry, her voice a fragile thing she wasn't sure she could summon. "Emma," she managed, her voice hoarse from disuse and anxiety. "My name is Emma, and this is Journey." She nodded towards the dog, who was now leaning into David's touch, practically purring. "Hey," he led me here. David's gaze lingered on her, not prying, but observant, as if he could see the raw edges of her weariness, the deep-seated guilt she carried like a shroud. He simply nodded. "Journey's a good guide. Always has been." He rose, extending a hand towards her, his palm calloused but warm. "I'm David. Welcome to our home." The simplicity of his words, the genuine warmth in his eyes, disarmed her. Emma hesitated for only a moment before taking his hand. His grip was firm, reassuring, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt a flicker of safety, a fragile sense of being anchored. He didn't ask where she came from, why she was alone, or what she was running from. He offered food, water, and a quiet corner by the fire. As she sat, warming her hands, sipping hot tea, and slowly eating the simple but nourishing stew, Emma observed the people around her. They were a diverse group, a young mother with her 2 children, an elderly couple, a lone artist sketching by the firelight, a burly man with kind eyes who seemed to be a general handyman. Each carried their own unspoken burdens, she was sure, but here they found solace in shared existence. David moved among them, a silent protector, his presence a steadying force. He listened more than he spoke, his quiet strength radiating outwards, knitting the disparate threads of their lives into a cohesive tapestry of community. Emma watched him, fascinated. He was a man who had built hope from devastation, a haven from his own profound loss. His wife, he had briefly mentioned to another settler, had been taken by a flash flood years ago. Yet, instead of succumbing to despair, he had channeled his grief into creation, transforming this secluded corner of Monument Valley into a sanctuary. It was a stark contrast to her own reaction to loss and failure. She had fled, retreated into herself, allowing guilt to consume her. David had built. He had chosen connection, chosen responsibility, chosen life. A seed of an unfamiliar emotion began to sprout within Emma, admiration, tinged with a painful yearning for such resilience. Days turned into a week. Emma, ever the survivor, found ways to be useful. She helped tend the small garden, mended torn canvas, and even assisted with the preparation of meals, her hands remembering skills long dormant. Journey remained her shadow, a constant, comforting presence, often seen curled at David's feet or following him as he went about his daily tasks. The dog seemed to have found its true home, and in doing so had led Emma to hers, or at least to a place where the concept of home no longer felt like a cruel joke. The fear of recognition, though still a low hum beneath her consciousness, began to recede, replaced by a tentative sense of belonging. No one asked about her past, and she offered no details, allowing the silence to be a shield she slowly, cautiously began to lower. She found herself drawn to David's quiet wisdom. They would sit sometimes, watching the sun dip below the red rock spires, painting the sky in fiery hues. He spoke of the land, of the delicate balance of nature, of the enduring strength of the human spirit. He spoke of loss, not with bitterness, but with a profound understanding that suffering was a part of life, and that true strength lay not in avoiding it, but in carrying its weight with grace. "We all carry our scars, Emma," he had said one evening, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Some are visible, some are etched deeper. But they don't have to define us. They can remind us of what we've survived and what we still have to give." His words were a balm to her wounded soul, a gentle invitation to consider a different path. Emma felt the hard shell she had built around herself begin to crack. The isolation that had once felt like protection now felt like a cage. Here, amidst these broken souls finding restoration, she saw a reflection of herself and a glimmer of what healing could look like. She was not just surviving. She was, for the first time in years, truly living, breathing air that felt less heavy, seeing colors that seemed more vibrant. The thought of leaving, of returning to her solitary wandering, now filled her with a new kind of dread, one that outweighed the fear of staying. This place, this community, David, and especially Journey, had become something vital, something she hadn't realized she was starving for. But the peace, Emma knew, was fragile. Nothing this good, this hopeful, could last forever, not in her life. She had learned that lesson the hard way at Canyon Ridge. The desert, for all its majesty, was also a place of harsh realities. And as the days turned into weeks, a new shadow began to creep across the sun-drenched valley. Whispers of a distant threat, of land disputes and powerful interests, began to circulate among the settlers. David, though he tried to shield them, carried a new tension in his shoulders, a subtle tightening around his eyes. He spoke of a woman, Catherine Sterling, a land baron known for her ruthless tactics, who sought to claim this very land. The sanctuary he had built, the home he had created from heartbreak, was under threat, and Emma, with her newly awakened sense of belonging, felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in her stomach. The past, she knew, had a way of catching up, and sometimes the very monsters you ran from were the ones waiting at your destination. She had found a home, but now she might have to fight to keep it. And for the first time, she was willing to. The quiet rhythm of the settlement began to mend the fractured landscape of Emma's soul. Days blended into a tapestry woven with purpose and connection, a stark contrast to the sterile, silent emptiness of her years in the wilderness. She rose with the sun, the cool desert air a cleansing breath, and found her place among the others. She learned the names of the children, whose laughter, once a startling intrusion, now felt like a melody, a reminder of pure, unburdened joy. She shared stories, not of her past, but of the present moment, the antics of a curious desert fox, the surprising bloom of a cactus flower, the subtle shifts in the light across the ancient rocks. Each shared glance, each shared meal, each shared silence, chipped away at the formidable walls she had erected around her heart. She spent hours working in the communal garden, her hands, once skilled in mapping trails and navigating treacherous terrain, now found a different kind of purpose in turning soil, planting seeds, and coaxing life from the arid earth. The simple act of nurturing, of watching something grow, mirrored the nascent hope stirring within her. Journey, ever present, would often lie beside her, its head resting on her thigh, a warm, reassuring weight. The dog, too, seemed to flourish in this place, its limp almost entirely gone, its eyes bright with an intelligence and contentment Emma hadn't seen before. They were both finding their footing, two lost souls guided to a shared haven. Emma observed David with a quiet intensity. He was not a man of grand pronouncements or dramatic gestures, but his strength resonated deeper than any words could convey. She saw him patiently teaching a young boy how to whittle, his large hands surprisingly gentle. She watched him mediate a small disagreement between two women with a calm wisdom that diffused tension like a summer breeze. He built, he nurtured, he protected. His grief, the profound loss of his wife, hadn't hardened him. It had refined him, transforming his sorrow into a wellspring of empathy and resilience. He carried his scars, as he had said, not as burdens that crippled him, but as reminders of the preciousness of life, of the enduring capacity for love even in the face of devastation. It was a stark, humbling contrast to her own reaction to Canyon Ridge. She had allowed her failure to define her, to paralyze her, to convince her that she was unworthy of connection, of joy, of a future. David had chosen a different path, a path of unwavering service, of building sanctuary from the ruins of his own heartbreak. He was a living testament to the idea that true strength wasn't about avoiding pain, but about transforming it. The evenings were particularly poignant, as the sun bled across the horizon, painting the Monument Valley spires in impossible shades of crimson and gold. The community would gather around the fire. Stories were shared, songs were sung, and a sense of shared humanity settled over them all. Emma, initially a silent observer, found herself occasionally offering a quiet comment, a small smile. She wasn't ready to bare her soul, but she was learning to simply be with others, to allow herself to feel the warmth of their collective spirit. David would often sit beside her, his presence a comforting anchor. He never pressed, never probed, but his steady gaze conveyed an understanding that transcended words. In his eyes, she saw not judgment, but acceptance, a quiet invitation to heal at her own pace. The hard shell of isolation that had encased Emma for so long began to crumble piece by agonizing piece. The silence of her solitary years, once a refuge, now felt like a hollow echo, a testament to what she had denied herself. Here, amidst these people, each carrying their own quiet battles, she felt a profound sense of belonging, a fragile but powerful realization that she was not alone. The fear of recognition, of her past catching up, had not entirely vanished, but it had receded, pushed back by the immediate, tangible reality of this newfound community. She was no longer just surviving. She was, for the first time in years, truly living. The air felt lighter, the colors of the desert more vivid, the taste of food more profound. The thought of returning to her solitary wandering, once her only perceived option, now filled her with a profound ache, a new kind of dread that eclipsed her old fears. This place, this fragile haven, David, and especially Journey, had become something vital, something she hadn't realized she was starving for. But the desert, for all its majestic beauty, was also a place of harsh realities, and peace, Emma knew, was often fleeting. Just as the warmth of the sun could give way to the sudden fury of a dust storm, so too could the tranquility of their sanctuary be threatened. Whispers began to circulate, subtle at first, like the dry rustle of leaves in a distant wind. Land disputes, powerful interests. A name began to surface with increasing frequency, spoken in hushed, worried tones. Catherine Sterling. A land baron, they called her, known for her ruthless tactics, her insatiable appetite for acquisition, her willingness to employ any means necessary to get what she wanted. David, though he tried to shield the community from the encroaching darkness, could not entirely hide the strain. A new tension settled in his shoulders, a subtle tightening around his kind eyes. His quiet strength was still there, but was now overlaid with a profound weariness, a deep concern for the people he had sworn to protect. He spoke of legal battles, of intimidators, of veiled threats that sought to chip away at their resolve, to pressure him into surrendering the very land he had transformed into a haven. This sanctuary, built from the ashes of his own devastating loss, was under direct assault. The thought of losing it, of seeing his vision of hope crumble, was a weight he carried with palpable grace. Emma felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in her stomach. The past, she knew, had a way of catching up. And sometimes, the very monsters you ran from were the ones waiting at your destination. She had found a home, a true sense of belonging she hadn't dared to dream of, but now it was under threat. The old instincts, the deeply ingrained urge to flee, to retreat into the safety of isolation, stirred within her. She knew the sting of failure, the crushing weight of responsibility when things went wrong. The idea of risking that again, of stepping back into the fray, was terrifying. But then she looked at Journey, curled contentedly by the fire, its eyes soft and trusting. She looked at the faces of the children, sleeping peacefully in their tents. She looked at David, his silhouette etched against the dying embers, a quiet guardian facing an overwhelming storm. And something shifted within her. The shame of Canyon Ridge, the guilt that had driven her into the wilderness, was still a part of her, a deep, unhealing wound. But now it was no longer the only part. David's words echoed in her mind. They don't have to define us. They can remind us of what we've survived and what we still have to give. Her greatest failures, she realized, had not broken her entirely. They had, in a strange, painful way, prepared her. Her hard-earned wisdom about human vulnerability, about the unpredictable nature of the world, made her a different person than the overconfident leader she once was. She was no longer seeking to prove her competence. She was seeking to protect what was good, what was fragile, what was worth fighting for. The fear was still there, a cold hand gripping her heart, but beneath it, a new resolve began to burn. She had spent years avoiding human connections and responsibility, fleeing from the possibility of failure. But now, seeing the quiet strength of David, witnessing the fragile hope he had cultivated, she knew she couldn't abandon him or this place. This time, she would choose bravery over safety. This time, she would face her demons. This time, she would fight. The sanctuary, this unlikely home for wounded spirits, would not fall without a struggle. And Emma, the guilt-ridden wanderer, would stand with it. The decision, once a whisper in the echoing chambers of her solitude, now resonated as a fierce, unwavering beat within Emma's chest. She would stand. She would fight. The weight of her past, the shame of Canyon Ridge, remained a heavy anchor, but it no longer dragged her down into the depths of inaction. Instead, it became a ballast, grounding her in a resolve forged in the fires of repentance and humility. The days that followed her internal turning point were marked by a quiet, determined shift in her actions. She didn't just observe David. She sought him out, offering her insights on desert safety, on identifying vulnerabilities in their defenses. Her mind, once consumed by routes of escape, now meticulously mapped strategies for protection. She helped fortify the perimeter, not with physical walls, but with an enhanced vigilance, teaching the community members how to read the subtle signs of intrusion, the telltale dust plumes on the horizon, the distant hum of an approaching engine that spoke of more than just a passing traveler. Journey, a silent sentinel, was always by her side, its watchful eyes mirroring her own newfound purpose. The whispers about Catherine Sterling had solidified into a chilling reality. The first wave of her assault wasn't with brute force, but with a calculated psychological torment. Sleek, dark vehicles, alien to the rugged landscape, began to appear on the distant ridges, their occupants watching the settlement through powerful binoculars. Legal documents, thick with incomprehensible jargon and veiled threats, were left at the edge of their communal lands, each one a poisoned dart aimed at David's resolve. Hired enforcers, not overtly violent but radiating an unspoken menace, would occasionally ride through the outskirts, their presence a stark reminder of the power Sterling wielded. They were ghosts in the periphery, designed to erode morale, to plant seeds of fear and doubt, to make the community question the very possibility of their continued existence. David carried the brunt of this pressure, his face etched with concern, but his quiet strength remained an unyielding core. He spent hours poring over maps and documents, consulting with the elders, his voice calm even as the storm gathered. Then, the inevitable arrived. A convoy of 3 polished black SUVs, kicking up plumes of red dust, cut a stark line across the ancient landscape, heading directly for the heart of the settlement. The sun, high and merciless, glinted off their windows, making them appear like dark, predatory insects. A hush fell over the community. Children, sensing the shift, clung to their parents. Even Journey, usually a picture of serene contentment, let out a low, guttural growl, its hackles subtly rising. From the lead vehicle emerged Catherine Sterling. She was everything the Whispers had portrayed and more, impeccably dressed in tailored clothes that seemed utterly out of place in the desert, her posture rigid with an unshakable sense of entitlement, her face a mask of cold, calculating intelligence. She surveyed the humble settlement, her gaze sweeping over the makeshift homes, the communal garden, the faces of the people, with an air of disdainful ownership. David stepped forward, his shoulders back, his presence a quiet defiance against the encroaching shadow. Emma stood just behind him, her heart hammering against her ribs, a primal instinct to flee warring with her newfound resolve. Sterling's eyes, as she spoke to David, were like chips of glacial ice, devoid of warmth or empathy. Her words, though calm, carried the weight of an unassailable authority, a clear message that this land, this hope, was already hers. And then her gaze drifted, a fleeting, almost imperceptible flick across the faces of the community. It lingered for a fraction of a second too long on Emma. A flicker of something, a spark of recognition, ignited in those cold eyes. The disdain sharpened into a predatory gleam, a sudden, chilling realization. A slow, cruel smile spread across Sterling's lips, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her voice, sharp as a shard of obsidian, cut through the tense silence, no longer directed solely at David, but the entire gathered community. Well, what we have here? It seems our benevolent protector, David Harrison, has quite the interesting collection of damaged goods. Her eyes, now fully locked on Emma, glittered with malicious triumph. And among them, a familiar face. Emma, or perhaps, for those who remember the headlines, Emma Thorne, the infamous Canyon Ridge catastrophe leader. The words hung in the scorching air, heavy and suffocating. Emma felt the blood drain from her face, the desert sun suddenly feeling like an icy grip. The shame, The raw, searing guilt she had carried for 3 years exploded to the surface, consuming her in a wave of nausea. She felt the eyes of the community turn towards her, their expressions a confused mix of curiosity, dawning realization, and perhaps nascent judgment. Sterling, savoring the moment, continued her calculated assault. This is the woman whose poor judgment, her overconfidence, led to the tragic loss of lives, the very reason Canyon Ridge became a graveyard for so many. A leader who abandoned her group, who fled from responsibility, only to resurface here, hiding among the vulnerable. Each word was a hammer blow, shattering the fragile peace Emma had found, threatening to demolish the sanctuary she had so desperately sought. The old fear, the deeply ingrained urge to retreat, to vanish into the vast emptiness of the desert, roared back to life. She felt the ground beneath her feet waver, the world threatening to collapse. The whispers began, soft at first, then growing louder, questions forming on the lips of the community members. Who was this woman they had welcomed? What dark secrets did she truly carry? Had they been naive? Had she been dishonest? The trust, so carefully built, felt like it was crumbling to dust around her. But then, a hand, warm and steady, found its way to her back, a silent, unwavering anchor. It was David. He hadn't flinched, hadn't recoiled. His eyes, though filled with a profound sadness at Sterling's cruelty, held no judgment for Emma, only a quiet, resolute strength. He simply stood there, a bulwark against the storm, his presence a powerful counter-narrative to Sterling's venom. He didn't need to speak. His steady gaze, his unyielding stance, communicated everything: acceptance, trust, and a refusal to be swayed by the manipulative tactics of a predator. In that moment, Emma looked at David, then at the faces of the community, some still questioning, some looking away, but others, remarkably, holding her gaze with a nascent understanding. She looked at Journey, whose soft muzzle pressed against her leg, its eyes filled with an unconditional loyalty. The shame was still there, a burning ember in her gut, but it was no longer all-consuming. It was a part of her, a scar, but did not define her. Sterling wanted her to flee, to crumble, to prove her worthlessness. But Emma had learned, through the quiet strength of David and the gentle guidance of Journey, that true healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about carrying its weight with courage. This was her test. This was her chance not just for redemption, but to show herself, and them, that her failures had, indeed, prepared her for this very moment. She would not abandon this place. She would not abandon David. She would not abandon herself. This time, she would stand. The desert wind, usually a comforting whisper, now seemed to carry the sharp, cutting edges of Catherine Sterling's words, slicing through the fragile peace Emma had painstakingly begun to build. Each syllable was a poisoned arrow, aimed not just at her reputation, but at the very heart of the sanctuary David had created. The collective gaze of the community, once welcoming, now held a new, unsettling blend of shock, curiosity, and a dawning, uncomfortable suspicion. Emma felt the familiar, suffocating grip of shame, a phantom weight that had haunted her steps for 3 long years, threatened to pull her back into the abyss of self-doubt. The urge to flee, to simply vanish into the vast, indifferent landscape, screamed through her veins with a primal urgency. It was the only response she had known, the only defense against the searing heat of judgment. But then, David's hand on her back, a silent, unwavering anchor against the storm, became a lifeline. His touch was not one of pity, nor even of comfort, but of shared resolve, a quiet declaration that she was not alone in this fight. And at her feet, Journey's soft muzzle pressed firmly against her leg, its eyes, deep and knowing, reflecting an unconditional trust that cut through the noise of Sterling's venom. In that moment, something shifted within Emma. The shame remained, a hot, burning ember in her gut, but it was no longer all-consuming. It became a crucible, forging a new kind of strength. She had spent years avoiding this confrontation, running from the specter of Canyon Ridge. But here, in the harsh, unyielding beauty of Monument Valley, she realized that true healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about learning to carry its weight with courage. This was her test, her chance not just for redemption, but to show herself and them that her failures had, indeed, prepared her for this very moment. She would not abandon this place. She would not abandon David. She would not abandon herself. This time, she would stand, taking a deep, shuddering breath that felt like drawing fire into her lungs. Emma met Sterling's glacial gaze. Her voice, though a tremor threatened to betray her, emerged with a surprising clarity, carrying across the hushed settlement. She didn't deny Sterling's accusations. She embraced them. She spoke of Canyon Ridge, not as a distant, forgotten tragedy, but as a living scar, a brutal lesson etched into her soul. She acknowledged her poor judgment, the overconfidence that had blinded her, the lives lost, the families irrevocably broken. There was no attempt to deflect blame, no excuses offered, only the raw, unvarnished truth of her failure. The air crackled with a palpable tension as she laid bare the deepest wounds of her past, a vulnerability so profound it felt like an act of defiance in itself. But then she pivoted. She explained how that catastrophe, the crushing weight of guilt, had stripped away her hubris, leaving behind a hard-earned wisdom about human frailty, about the subtle dangers of the wild, about the absolute necessity of vigilance and humility. She spoke of the profound difference between fleeing from responsibility and learning to carry its burden, using its lessons to protect others. Her voice, gaining strength with each word, became a testament to transformation. She wasn't the same Emma Thorne who had led a group to disaster. She was a woman forged in that fire, tempered by regret, and now fiercely committed to ensuring no one else under her watch would suffer a similar fate. She looked at the faces of the community, not pleading for forgiveness, but offering them a raw, honest account of who she was now and what she had become capable of. Catherine Sterling, initially caught off guard by Emma's unexpected candor, recovered quickly. Her cruel smile returned, a predatory gleam in her eyes. She began to speak, her words dripping with condescension, attempting to dismiss Emma's confession as a manipulative performance, a desperate plea for sympathy from a damaged soul. She painted Emma's honesty as a calculated ploy, another example of her inherent untrustworthiness. But before Sterling could fully regain her momentum, David stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Emma, his posture radiating quiet strength. He didn't speak, didn't utter a single word in Emma's defense. He didn't need to. His very presence, his unwavering stance beside her, was a powerful counter-narrative to Sterling's venom. It was an unspoken affirmation of trust, a silent vow of solidarity that resonated more deeply than any verbal argument. The community, who had listened in stunned silence to Emma's confession, now watched David. His quiet, unyielding support, in the face of such a public and brutal attack, spoke volumes. It was a testament to the man he was, a gentle protector who built hope from devastating loss, and whose judgment they had come to implicitly trust. A ripple of understanding, a slow, cautious shift in perception, began to move through the gathered crowd. Not everyone was immediately convinced. The whispers still lingered, but the initial shock and judgment were slowly giving way to a nascent respect for Emma's courage and for David's unwavering faith in her. They saw not a flawless leader, but a profoundly human one, scarred but not broken, and willing to risk everything for the community. Sterling, sensing the subtle shift in the atmosphere, her calculated assault faltering, narrowed her eyes. Emma's defiant honesty, backed by David's stoic presence, had been an unexpected obstacle. She had anticipated Emma crumbling, fleeing, confirming her perceived worthlessness. Instead, she had encountered a resilience born of profound suffering, a strength that was both raw and unyielding. The battle, she realized, would be far more challenging than she had anticipated. With a final, dismissive wave of her hand, a gesture meant to convey her utter disdain, Sterling turned and walked back to her waiting SUV. But her parting words, delivered with a chilling calm, were a promise of escalation. She spoke of legal battles, of resource exhaustion, of a relentless pressure that would slowly but surely crush their spirit, leaving them with no choice but to surrender. As the convoy of black vehicles receded into the shimmering heat haze, leaving behind only plumes of red dust, a heavy silence fell over the settlement. Emma felt utterly drained, the emotional ordeal leaving her physically trembling. But beneath the exhaustion, a flicker of something new, something powerful, ignited within her. She had faced her demons, not in solitude, but in the glaring light of public scrutiny, and she had not broken. She had not fled. She had stood. Journey nudged her hand, a soft, reassuring whine, its eyes reflecting the boundless sky. The fight was far from over. The threats were real and terrifying. But Emma had taken the first, crucial step. She had chosen bravery over safety, and in doing so, had begun to transform the very meaning of her past failures, turning them into the foundation of a new, unshakable resolve. The sanctuary, once a temporary refuge, now felt like a home worth fighting for, built on the fragile but potent pillars of shared vulnerability and emergent trust. The silence that descended upon the settlement after Catherine Sterling's convoy vanished was not a peaceful one. It was heavy, laden with the dust of fear and the acrid smoke of doubt. The air itself seemed to hum with unspoken questions, with the weight of Emma's raw confession and the chilling promise of Sterling's return. For a long moment, no one moved. The children, usually boisterous, clung to their parents, their small faces mirroring the anxiety etched on the adults. Emma stood rooted, the tremors that had begun during her confrontation now shaking her to her core, but she refused to let them show on her face. Her gaze, though weary, held a new, unyielding quality. Journey remained pressed against her leg, a warm, furry anchor in the swirling, emotional tempest. David, ever the quiet pillar, was the first to break the spell. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. Instead, his voice, low and steady, carried a profound truth. He spoke of the desert's lessons, of how the strongest roots grow in the harshest soil, of how unity was their only shield against the storms to come. He didn't dismiss Sterling's threats. He acknowledged them, validated the fear, but then, crucially, he offered a path forward. He looked at Emma, a silent message passing between them, a recognition of the immense courage she had just displayed, and an unspoken invitation to lead alongside him. In the days that followed, the settlement became a hive of purpose, driven by a shared, if still fragile, resolve. The initial shock gave way to a sober assessment of their situation. Sterling's threats weren't just legal, they were existential. Emma, despite the lingering exhaustion, found herself drawn into the practicalities of survival, a familiar territory where her mind, once clouded by guilt, now found sharp focus. She walked the perimeter of the refuge with David, her eyes, honed by years in the wilderness, noticing details others missed. A subtle dip in the land that could channel a flash flood, a stretch of exposed wall vulnerable to the elements, a hidden path that could be used for infiltration. She didn't just point out weaknesses, she offered solutions. Her voice, no longer hesitant, but clear and authoritative, explained how to reinforce structures using local materials, how to establish early warning systems against both natural dangers and human intrusion, how to ration water and food more effectively. She spoke of the importance of vigilance, of shared responsibility, of understanding the land not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Her knowledge, born of painful lessons, was not theoretical. It was visceral, honed by the harsh realities of survival. The Canyon Ridge disaster, once a source of paralyzing shame, now became a wellspring of practical wisdom, a brutal education that had equipped her with an almost instinctual understanding of risk and resilience. Slowly, cautiously, the community began to listen. They saw not the flawed leader from Sterling's accusations, but a woman who had faced her failures head-on, who carried her scars openly, and who was now using that hard-won experience to protect them. The whispers didn't entirely vanish, but they changed. They were no longer whispers of suspicion, but of awe, of grudging respect. Children, drawn to Journey's gentle nature, would often trail Emma as she worked, their innocent curiosity a balm to her wounded spirit. Journey, ever present, was her silent partner, its unwavering loyalty a constant affirmation that she was where she needed to be. David watched Emma with a quiet intensity. He saw the transformation unfolding before his eyes. The haunted wanderer who had arrived at his doorstep was giving way to a leader, a protector whose strength was precisely because of her past, not in spite of it. He saw how her vulnerability, her willingness to admit her deepest mistakes, resonated with the broken souls he had gathered. She wasn't pretending to be perfect. She was profoundly human, and in that humanity, she offered a different kind of hope, a hope that acknowledged pain but refused to be defined by it. He recognized that her wisdom, forged in the crucible of tragedy, was exactly what this fragile community needed. He had built a sanctuary from loss, but Emma was showing him how to build a home, a permanent home, where healing was not just about finding shelter, but about rediscovering purpose. Then, the first official volley arrived. A thick envelope, bearing the insignia of Catherine Sterling's legal firm, was delivered by a somber-faced courier who seemed to materialize from the shimmering heat. It contained demands, threats of lawsuits, claims of trespassing, and thinly veiled warnings about the consequences of noncompliance. It was the psychological warfare Sterling had promised, a deliberate attempt to wear them down, to sow fear and discord, to make them doubt their right to exist. The document was dense with legalese, designed to intimidate, to overwhelm. Panic, cold and insidious, threatened to creep back into the settlement. But this time, something was different. Emma, having spent the past few days immersed in the practicalities of defense, found a new kind of calm. She sat with David, poring over the documents, her brow furrowed in concentration. She couldn't understand every legal nuance, but she understood the intent: to isolate, to intimidate, to fracture. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that their greatest defense lay in their unity. She proposed a meeting not just of a select few, but of the entire adult community. She explained the documents in plain, accessible language, stripping away the legal jargon to reveal the stark reality of Sterling's tactics. She didn't minimize the danger, but she also didn't allow fear to paralyze them. She spoke of collective action, of seeking outside legal counsel, of using their shared history and their deep connection to the land as a moral shield. She spoke of turning Sterling's psychological warfare into a rallying cry, a reason to dig in deeper, to fight harder. The response was not immediate unanimity, but a growing sense of shared purpose. The fear was still there, a tangible presence, but was now tempered by a burgeoning sense of defiance. They had seen Emma's honesty, witnessed David's unwavering faith, and felt the quiet strength that had begun to radiate from their combined leadership. They had chosen to believe in the possibility of a different future, one where their sanctuary was not a temporary escape, but a permanent testament to resilience. Emma, looking out at the faces of the community, saw not just fear, but a flicker of the same fire that now burned within her. She saw people willing to learn, willing to fight, willing to put their trust in a woman who carried the weight of a devastating past, but who had chosen, fiercely and unequivocally, to stand. The sanctuary was no longer just David's dream. It was becoming their collective destiny. And Emma, the wanderer who had sought only to outrun her guilt, realized that in choosing to face her demons here, she was not just protecting others, but finally, truly, healing herself. Her greatest failure had indeed prepared her for her most crucial victory, not as an individual triumph, but as a shared struggle, transforming their temporary shelter into a home where wounded spirits could find restoration together. The desert wind, once a carrier of Sterling's venom, now seemed to whisper promises of enduring hope, forged in the heart of Monument Valley. The whispers of hope that had momentarily softened the desert wind proved to be fleeting, a cruel mirage. Catherine Sterling, a predator of the human spirit as much as of the land, was not one to allow defiance to fester. Her legal volley was merely the opening shot, a psychological probe designed to identify weaknesses. Now, the true siege began, insidious and relentless. The first signs were subtle, insidious. Deliveries of essential supplies, once sporadic but reliable, began to falter, then stopped entirely. Trucks that had always navigated the treacherous backroads to their secluded valley suddenly found their paths blocked by unforeseen rock slides or accidental detours. The few merchants brave enough to risk Sterling's wrath found their own businesses targeted, their licenses scrutinized, their prices undercut. It was an invisible hand, choking the lifeblood of the settlement, designed to starve them into submission without a single overt act of aggression. The message was clear. No one could help them. No one would dare. Then came the assault on their most precious resource, water. The hidden spring, a miracle of the desert David had so painstakingly cultivated, began to show signs of deliberate tampering. A subtle discoloration, a faint, metallic taste that sent a shiver of dread through the community. It wasn't poisoned, not yet, but the message was chillingly clear. Sterling could reach them, could touch their very source of life at will. Panic, a cold, dry wind, swept through the settlement. The fragile unity they had forged threatened to crack under the weight of this existential threat. Children coughed, their small bodies vulnerable, and the adults looked at each other with fear in their eyes, remembering the brutal realities of the desert, the unforgiving nature of thirst. It was in this moment of acute crisis that Emma's transformation truly solidified. The ghost of Canyon Ridge, once a paralyzing specter, now became a guiding force. Her past failures, the lessons learned in the crucible of disaster, were not just theoretical knowledge. They were now visceral instincts, sharpened by the harsh demands of survival. She moved with a quiet urgency, her gaze scanning the landscape, her mind racing. Journey, sensing the shift, remained a shadow at her heels, its deep-set eyes reflecting an ancient wisdom, a silent affirmation of her purpose. Emma didn't hesitate. She rallied the community, not with grand speeches, but with calm, decisive action. She organized teams to patrol the supply routes, not just looking for blockages, but for the subtle signs of human interference, for the eyes that might be watching. She taught them how to read the tracks of vehicles, how to identify freshly disturbed earth, how to communicate silently across vast distances using hand signals and light flashes. Her voice, clear and unwavering, cut through the rising panic, offering not false hope, but a tangible plan, a path forward forged in hard-won experience. Simultaneously, she turned her attention to the water. With David by her side, she led a small group to the spring, meticulously examining every inch of the surrounding terrain. Her years of wilderness survival had taught her to respect water, to understand its delicate balance. She discovered subtle diversions, expertly disguised, designed to leach contaminants into the flow, slowly, insidiously. It was a sophisticated attack, one that required intimate knowledge of the desert's hydrology. It confirmed their worst fears. Sterling had operatives on the ground, deep within their sanctuary, watching their every move. Emma didn't just fix the problem, she fortified it. She directed the construction of a new, more secure filtration system, teaching the community how to build it from local materials, how to maintain it, how to protect it. She showed them how to dig secondary wells, deeper and more hidden, creating a redundancy that would guard against future attacks. Her hands, once accustomed to maps and compasses, now worked with picks and shovels side by side with the very people she was protecting. She was no longer just a leader. She was a fellow builder, a guardian of their shared future, her actions speaking louder than any words. David watched her, a profound sense of awe mingling with a deep, quiet affection. He had built this refuge with bricks of hope and the mortar of loss, but Emma was transforming it, fortifying it, making it resilient. He saw how her vulnerability, her willingness to admit her past mistakes, had paradoxically become her greatest strength. She wasn't leading from a pedestal. She was leading from the trenches, acknowledging their fears because she had known profound fear herself. Her wisdom, born from the crucible of tragedy, was not just about survival. It was about the defiant act of choosing to live, to thrive, despite the shadows of the past. He understood now, with absolute clarity, that she was not just a temporary savior. She was an essential part of their permanent home, the missing piece in his fractured dream. The community, having witnessed Emma's practical brilliance and unyielding resolve, responded with a renewed, fierce determination. The fear didn't vanish, but it transmuted into a powerful, collective anger, a shared will to resist. They were no longer just a collection of displaced families. They were a burgeoning tribe, bound by shared purpose and the knowledge that their future depended on their unity. They learned to ration their resources with disciplined efficiency, to move with greater stealth, to listen to the land with Emma's trained ear. The children, too young to fully grasp the danger, nonetheless absorbed the spirit of resilience, watching their parents and Emma with wide, observant eyes. Then, the veiled threats gave way to more direct intimidation. Strange figures began to appear on the periphery of their valley, not openly hostile, but always watching, always probing. They were Sterling's enforcers, not yet ready for a direct confrontation, but testing the waters, mapping their defenses, a psychological game designed to keep them on edge, to erode their sense of safety. Emma, recognizing the tactic, knew that the next phase would be more aggressive, more direct. She established a rigorous watch system, utilizing the natural overlooks and hidden caves that dotted the valley's rim. She taught them rudimentary self-defense, how to use the desert itself as an ally, how to disappear into its vastness, how to make it an impenetrable fortress. She spoke of the importance of knowing their enemy, of understanding Sterling's playbook, of anticipating her next move. The Canyon Ridge disaster, once a source of paralyzing shame, now served as a brutal, invaluable primer in anticipating risk and mitigating consequences. She was no longer just protecting them from external threats. She was empowering them, teaching them to protect themselves, to find their own strength. In the quiet hours, when the desert stars burned with an indifferent brilliance, Emma would often sit on a high ridge, Journey curled beside her, watching the vast, silent expanse. The weight of responsibility was immense, heavier than any backpack she had ever carried. The memory of Canyon Ridge still flickered at the edges of her consciousness, a constant reminder of the catastrophic cost of poor judgment, of overconfidence. But now, it wasn't a paralysis, it was a sharpened edge, a sober understanding of human vulnerability, a fierce commitment to vigilance. She wasn't fleeing her past. She was harnessing its painful lessons, transforming them into a shield for others. David would sometimes join her, sitting in companionable silence, the unspoken bond between them deepening with each passing day. He saw the toll it took on her, the sleepless nights, the relentless pressure, but he also saw the unyielding strength, the quiet determination that had replaced the haunted look in her eyes. He knew that their greatest failure had indeed prepared her for her most crucial victory. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about integrating it, about finding purpose in its shadows, about building a future on the bedrock of hard-won wisdom. The settlement, once a temporary sanctuary, was evolving. It was no longer just a place to hide. It was a home being built brick by brick, not just of adobe and stone, but of shared courage, collective resilience, and an unshakable belief in a future forged together. Emma, the guilt-ridden wanderer, had found her place not by escaping her demons, but by choosing to face them here in the heart of Monument Valley. The desert, a harsh and unforgiving teacher, was revealing its ultimate lesson. True healing was not about avoiding failure, but about learning to carry its weight with grace and choosing, always, to stand with bravery. The wind, once a carrier of Sterling's venom, now seemed to whisper promises of enduring hope, forged in the crucible of their shared struggle. The fragile peace that had settled over Monument Valley was abruptly shattered, not by a desert storm, but by the calculated malice of Catherine Sterling. The veiled threats, the silent probes, they were merely a prelude. Now, the predator moved for the kill. The first sign came with the setting sun, not a whisper on the wind, but the glint of steel and the rumble of engines from beyond the mesas. Emma, perched on her usual overlook, Journey, a silent sentinel beside her, felt a cold dread twist in her gut. This was it. The direct confrontation she had anticipated, the moment her hard-won wisdom would truly be tested. Sterling's enforcers, a dozen hardened men, moved under the cover of dusk, their intent clear: to dismantle the refuge piece by piece, to break the spirit of its inhabitants through terror and destruction. They struck simultaneously at key points: the newly fortified spring, the supply caches, the communal shelters. Their goal wasn't just to seize the land, but to eradicate the hope that had taken root there. Explosions, small but concussive, ripped through the twilight, sending plumes of dust and debris into the air. The shouts of the enforcers mingled with the cries of startled children and the frantic barks of the settlement dogs. Panic, raw and visceral, threatened to engulf them. But Emma was ready. The lessons of Canyon Ridge, once a source of paralyzing shame, now fueled her every move, her every decision. She knew the devastating cost of hesitation, the unforgiving nature of chaos. Her voice, amplified by the desert's echo, cut through the din, calm and authoritative, a lifeline in the maelstrom. To your positions. Remember the signals. Use the shadows. Protect the children. She had drilled them for this, not in mock battles, but in understanding the terrain, in moving as one, in turning their vulnerability into an unexpected strength. David, his face etched with grim determination, rallied the community's men and women, leading them to their pre-assigned defensive points. He moved with a quiet ferocity Emma hadn't seen before, a protector defending his dream, his family. His eyes met hers across the chaotic expanse, a silent pledge of trust and unwavering support. Journey, sensing the shift in the air, moved like a phantom, herding the younger children towards the deepest, most secure cave, its ancient instincts guiding her with uncanny precision. Emma directed the counterattack, not with weapons of aggression, but with the subtle, cunning tactics of the desert itself. The enforcers, expecting a desperate, disorganized resistance, found themselves disoriented. Paths they thought clear were suddenly blocked by expertly felled rock slides. Hidden tripwires, barely visible in the fading light, sent men sprawling. The desert, under Emma's command, became an active participant, an ally. Her voice, a steady current, guided the community's actions. Flank left. Draw them into the canyon. Use the dust. She wasn't just reacting. She was orchestrating, transforming the chaos into a strategic dance. The settlement members, once displaced and broken, now moved with a purpose born of shared adversity. They were not soldiers, but they were a community fighting for their very existence. They extinguished small fires, diverted the enforcers from vital resources, and used the familiar landscape to their advantage, melting into the shadows, reappearing unexpectedly, a phantom resistance. They had learned from Emma that their strength lay not in overwhelming force, but in their collective wit, their unity, and their intimate knowledge of their home. One of Sterling's men, a burly figure with a cruel glint in his eye, managed to breach the perimeter near the main communal shelter, aiming to set it ablaze. But before he could act, David, moving with surprising speed, intercepted him. The two men clashed, a brutal, silent struggle in the dust. David, smaller but fueled by a fierce protective instinct, fought with a primal strength, embodying the gentle protector transformed into a guardian. Emma, seeing the struggle from her vantage point, quickly dispatched two of the community's swiftest members to assist, their actions coordinated with a precision that spoke volumes of her training. The enforcers, surprised by the unexpected resilience and the almost supernatural coordination of the defenders, began to falter. They had anticipated easy prey, not a united front led by a strategist who understood every nuance of the land. The psychological warfare they had intended to inflict was now being turned back on them. The desert, a silent witness to countless struggles for survival, now seemed to hum with the defiant spirit of those who chose to make it their home. As the moon climbed higher, casting long, distorted shadows, the enforcers, demoralized and outmaneuvered, began to retreat. They had inflicted damage, but they had failed to break the community's spirit or seize the property. Their retreat was not a rout, but a grudging withdrawal, leaving behind a trail of frustration and a clear message. This was far from over. Emma watched them go, her body tense, her mind already calculating the next moves. The immediate danger had passed, but the scars remained, scorched earth, damaged structures, and a lingering tremor of fear in the air. Yet, amidst the devastation, there was also a profound sense of triumph, a quiet pride in what they had accomplished together. She had not just led them. She had empowered them, showing them that their collective vulnerability could be their greatest strength. David approached her, his face smudged with dirt and streaked with sweat, a deep cut bleeding on his arm. He didn't speak, but his eyes, filled with exhaustion and a powerful, unspoken gratitude, conveyed everything. He saw not just a leader, but a woman who had faced her own deepest fears and emerged stronger, a beacon of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. He knew then, with absolute certainty, that this was no longer just his refuge. It was their home, forged in fire, defended by courage, and bound by a shared future. The community, though shaken, gathered in the flickering light of emergency lanterns, tending to the wounded, assessing the damage. There were no grand pronouncements, just a quiet determination, a newfound understanding of their collective power. Emma's hard-earned wisdom about human vulnerability, once a source of deep shame, had indeed prepared her for this crucial victory. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about integrating its painful lessons, transforming them into a shield for others, a foundation for a future where broken souls could find restoration, together, in the heart of Monument Valley. The desert wind, no longer carrying whispers of fear, now sang a song of enduring hope, a defiant anthem against the encroaching darkness. The silence that followed the retreat of Sterling's enforcers was not empty, but thick with the weight of recent violence, a ringing echo in the desert night. It was the quiet after the storm, where the true cost was tallied, and the spirit of survival was tested anew. Smoke still curled from damaged structures, the scent of scorched earth mingling with the cool night air. The community, though victorious, was bruised, their temporary home bearing fresh wounds. Emma moved through the gathering, her heart a drumbeat of weary vigilance. She saw the fear in their eyes, yes, but also a flicker of something new, a defiant pride, a unity forged in fire. She had seen this look before in the aftermath of Canyon Ridge, but then it had been accompanied by despair, by the crushing burden of loss. Here now it was different. Here hope, though scarred, held firm. Journey, ever the silent guardian, nudged against Emma's leg, a warm presence, a grounding force. The dog's eyes, luminous in the dim light, seemed to reflect the myriad emotions swirling around them. The relief, the sorrow, the resolve. Emma knelt, running a hand over Journey's soft fur, drawing strength from the unspoken bond they shared. This creature, this improbable guide, had led her not just to a place, but to a purpose. David, his arm bandaged, his face etched with exhaustion, stood by the central fire, its flames now rekindled, casting long, dancing shadows. He spoke in low, steady tones, directing the efforts to tend to the wounded, to secure what supplies remained, to reinforce the weakened defenses. His voice, though quiet, carried the weight of a man who had stared into the abyss of loss and chosen, repeatedly, to build anew. He was no longer just the gentle protector. He was a leader, tested and true, his quiet strength amplified by the shared struggle. Emma watched him, a profound respect blooming in her chest. He hadn't just built a refuge. He had built a family, and tonight they had fought for it together. The days that followed were a blur of ceaseless activity, a testament to the community's indomitable spirit. They repaired the damaged shelters, cleared the rock slides, and nursed their wounds, both physical and emotional. Emma, drawing on every ounce of her hard-won experience, organized the rebuilding efforts with an efficiency born of necessity. She delegated tasks, managed resources, and, perhaps most importantly, listened. She listened to their fears, their frustrations, their quiet triumphs. She didn't just issue commands. She built consensus, fostering a sense of ownership, reminding them that this was their home, their fight. She remembered the crushing weight of responsibility at Canyon Ridge, the isolation of command, the fear of making the wrong choice. But here, in Monument Valley, surrounded by these resilient souls, the burden felt different. It was shared, embraced, understood. Her past failures, once a source of paralyzing shame, were now a wellspring of wisdom. She knew the pitfalls of overconfidence, the devastating consequences of underestimating danger. She understood human vulnerability not as a weakness to be overcome, but as an intrinsic part of their shared humanity, a truth that, when acknowledged, could become a profound source of strength. This understanding allowed her to lead with empathy, to anticipate not just the tactical moves of an enemy, but the emotional needs of her people. Catherine Sterling, however, was not one to admit defeat easily. Her retreat was merely a strategic pause, a regrouping of her considerable resources. Humiliated by the unexpected resistance, her resolve to crush the refuge only hardened. The quiet desert, which had momentarily celebrated its small victory, now held its breath, sensing the shift in the wind, the gathering storm of Sterling's renewed malice. This time, her tactics will be different, more insidious, designed to unravel the community from within, to delegitimize their very right to exist. The first hint came not with the rumble of engines, but with the crisp rustle of legal papers. A summons delivered by a grim-faced courier who seemed entirely out of place amidst the red rocks, accusing David Harrison of illegal squatting, of environmental infractions, of harboring fugitives. It was a calculated strike, aimed at the heart of their legitimacy, designed to drain their resources, to exhaust their spirit through endless legal battles. Sterling intended to win not with brute force, but with the cold, unfeeling machinery of the law, turning their quiet sanctuary into a legal battlefield. David, holding the official documents, felt a familiar despair creep in. He had faced flash floods, personal loss, and the raw violence of Sterling's enforcers. But this bureaucratic assault felt different, almost insurmountable. How could they fight against a system designed to protect the powerful, against accusations twisted to serve Sterling's avarice? His quiet strength, usually a steady beacon, wavered under the onslaught of legalese and veiled threats. He had built this refuge on hope, on the unspoken understanding that humanity could transcend the rigid confines of law. But now, the law itself was being weaponized against them. It was then that Sterling herself made her grand entrance, not with a raiding party, but with a retinue of lawyers and media strategists, arriving in sleek vehicles that seemed to mock the rugged landscape. She stood before the community, a predatory smile playing on her lips, her gaze sweeping over the scarred settlement with an air of proprietorship. And then, her eyes landed on Emma. A flicker of recognition, sharp and malevolent, crossed her face. The Canyon Ridge disaster, once a distant memory, now became a weapon in Sterling's hands. Well, Sterling purred, her voice dripping with venom. If it isn't Emma Vance. The infamous guide from Canyon Ridge. I heard you'd vanished after that. Unfortunate incident. Seems you have a knack for leading people into trouble, don't you? Her words, amplified by the desert stillness, cut through the air, a deliberate, public excavation of Emma's deepest shame. It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare designed to undermine Emma's authority, to sow seeds of doubt among the community. A wave of murmurs rippled through the gathering. Faces turned to Emma, some with curiosity, some with dawning understanding, some with a flicker of apprehension. The past, which she had worked so hard to integrate, to transform, was now laid bare, twisted into a tool of destruction. For a moment, Emma felt the old, familiar paralysis, the cold grip of guilt tightening around her heart. She saw the questions in their eyes, the unspoken accusations. Would they turn on her? Would her presence, once a source of strength, now become their undoing? But then, she looked at David. His eyes, though weary, held no judgment, only unwavering trust, a silent affirmation. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, had witnessed her transformation, and his belief in her was absolute. She looked at Journey, whose steady gaze was a mirror of unconditional acceptance. And she looked at the faces of the community, the displaced, the broken souls she had come to protect. They had followed her, trusted her, fought alongside her. To flee now, to let Sterling's poisonous words drive a wedge between them, would be to betray not just them, but the woman she had become. This was the moment of truth. This was the choice she had spent years avoiding. To face her demons, publicly, unequivocally, and risk failure again rather than abandon the man whose quiet strength had shown her what healing could look like. Her greatest failure had indeed prepared her for this crucial victory, not by erasing the past, but by teaching her the profound, enduring power of vulnerability and the courage it took to choose bravery over safety. The settlement, once a temporary shelter, was now a crucible, forging a permanent home where wounded spirits could find restoration, together, under the watchful, ancient gaze of Monument Valley. The battle for the land was not just a legal fight, but a fight for identity, for belonging, for the very soul of a community refusing to be broken. Emma knew, with a fierce certainty, that she would not let them down. Not again. The desert wind seemed to hold its breath, amplifying Catherine Sterling's poisoned words, making them echo not just in the air, but in the hollow chambers of Emma's own heart. Canyon Ridge. The name was a brand, burned into her soul, a scar she had carried in silence for years. The faces of the lost, the echoes of her own misjudgment, threatened to overwhelm her. For a fleeting, agonizing moment, the old paralysis returned, a cold dread that whispered, "Run, hide, you are not worthy." But then, her gaze found David's, steady and clear, a silent harbor in the storm. Journey nudged her hand, a warm, undeniable presence. And in the eyes of the community, she saw not just apprehension, but a fragile hope, a plea for truth. This was not just about her. It was about them, about the home they were fighting for, the future they were building. She would not let Sterling weaponize her past to destroy their present. Taking a deep, anchoring breath, Emma stepped forward, her voice, though initially soft, gaining strength with each word, resonating with an honesty that cut through the desert stillness. "She's right," Emma began, her eyes sweeping over the faces before her, meeting each gaze directly. "Catherine Sterling is right. 3 years ago, at Canyon Ridge, my judgment failed. My overconfidence, my belief that I knew best, led to a tragedy. People died, and I carry the weight of that loss every single day." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a profound, heavy silence. This was not the defiance they expected, not the denial Sterling hoped for. This was raw, unvarnished truth. "I ran from it," Emma continued, her voice now steady, imbued with a quiet power. "I ran from the guilt, from the responsibility, from the very idea of ever leading again, of ever connecting with people. I became a ghost, wandering, trying to outrun the echoes of my mistakes." Her gaze fixed on Sterling, a flicker of defiance now in her eyes. "But running doesn't erase the past. It only buries the lessons. And those lessons, hard-earned and devastating as they were, taught me about human vulnerability, about the fragile line between confidence and arrogance, between leadership and hubris. They taught me the true cost of failure. She turned back to the community, her expression earnest, vulnerable, yet resolute. When Journey found me, broken and lost, she led me here, to this place, to you, to David. And here, I found something I thought I'd lost forever, the courage to face my demons. The courage to risk failure again, but this time, to risk it for something worth fighting for. She paused, letting her words sink in, allowing the raw emotion to settle. I'm not the woman I was at Canyon Ridge. I am a woman forged in its fires, tempered by its sorrow. I understand vulnerability not as a weakness, but as an intrinsic part of our shared humanity, a truth that, when acknowledged, can become our greatest strength. I know the pitfalls of overconfidence, the devastating consequences of underestimating danger, because I lived them. And I promise you this, I will use every hard-won lesson, every painful memory, to protect this home, to protect us. The effect was profound. Sterling's predatory smile vanished, replaced by a look of bewildered frustration. Her weaponized past had not just misfired. It had transformed into a shield, an unexpected source of Emma's strength. The murmurs from the community were no longer apprehensive, but a wave of quiet understanding, then a rising tide of respect. They saw not a broken leader, but a woman who had faced her deepest shame, owned her mistakes, and emerged stronger, wiser, more human. David, his eyes brimming with a silent pride, stepped closer, his hand finding hers, a gesture of unwavering support that spoke volumes. Journey, sensing the shift, let out a soft whine, pressing against Emma's leg, a silent affirmation of their shared journey. In that moment, the bonds of the community, already tested by Sterling's brute force, were forged anew, tempered by truth and vulnerability. The legal papers, the threats, the psychological warfare, they still loomed, but now they faced a united front, led by a woman who had dared to be truly seen. Emma, no longer a wanderer, but a guardian, stood ready. The days that followed were a testament to this renewed resolve. Emma, with David by her side, immersed herself in the daunting task of preparing for the legal battle. Her years of crisis management experience, honed by the very tragedy Sterling sought to exploit, proved invaluable. She organized the community not just for physical defense, but for legal defense. They meticulously documented every claim, every veiled threat, every act of intimidation from Sterling's camp. Emma, understanding the insidious nature of psychological warfare, coached the community on how to remain calm, how to present a united front, how to counter Sterling's narratives with their own unwavering truth. She explained that Sterling's strategy was to drain their resources, exhaust their spirit, and delegitimize their existence through a barrage of legal filings and public smear campaigns. She wants us to feel like we don't belong here, Emma explained during a community meeting, her voice calm but firm. She wants us to believe that her law is the only law. But our belonging is not dictated by her papers. It's forged in our shared history, in our collective fight, in the very ground beneath our feet that we have nurtured and defended. David, though still navigating the complexities of the legal jargon, found his quiet strength amplified by Emma's pragmatic leadership. He focused on ensuring the community's well-being, tending to their emotional needs, while Emma tackled the strategic and tactical aspects. Their partnership was a perfect balance. His empathy and unwavering hope, her hard-earned wisdom and strategic acumen. Together, they transformed the threat of legal action into an opportunity for collective empowerment. The community members, inspired by Emma's courage and David's steadfastness, rose to the challenge. They gathered local historical records, indigenous land claims, and testimonies of their work in revitalizing the arid landscape. They formed committees, studied legal precedents, and even reached out to sympathetic journalists, turning Sterling's media manipulation against her. The refuge was no longer just a place of shelter. It was a living, breathing entity, fighting for its right to exist, fueled by a collective spirit that refused to be extinguished. Emma's greatest failures had indeed prepared her for this most crucial victory. Her overconfidence at Canyon Ridge had taught her humility. Her isolation had taught her the profound power of community. Her guilt had taught her the liberating strength of truth. She was no longer just avoiding human connections. She was actively forging them, building a network of trust and resilience that Sterling, with all her wealth and power, could never break. The settlement, once a temporary haven for broken souls, was now unequivocally a permanent home, a bastion of hope against the encroaching darkness. The battle for Monument Valley was far from over, but the community, united and resolute, stood ready, their spirits soaring like the desert eagles, their resolve as unyielding as the ancient red rocks that watched over them. Emma, once lost, was now found, leading them all towards a future they would build together. The desert, an ancient witness to countless struggles, now bore testament to a different kind of war. Catherine Sterling, a force of nature in her own right, unleashed a relentless torrent of legal filings, media smears, and thinly veiled threats. Her strategy was clear: overwhelm, exhaust, and demoralize. But she had underestimated the resilience of a community forged in adversity and the quiet, unwavering resolve of the woman who now stood at its heart. Emma, no longer a ghost haunting the fringes of humanity, moved with purpose, her mind a steel trap, her spirit a lighthouse in the storm. She understood Sterling's tactics, not just intellectually, but viscerally. She knew the insidious creep of doubt, the way fear could paralyze. And because she knew it, she knew how to fight it. Each day was a battle. Emma, with Journey a constant, grounding presence at her side, meticulously organized the community's defense. She transformed their fear into action, their apprehension into meticulous documentation. She taught them to log every intimidating visit, every suspicious vehicle, every veiled threat. They compiled local histories, land claims stretching back generations, and testimonies of their painstaking work to coax life from the arid land. Emma saw the community not as victims, but as guardians, each person a vital thread in the tapestry of their shared home. She coached them on how to respond to Sterling's provocations, not with anger, but with quiet dignity, with unwavering truth. "She wants to isolate us," Emma would explain, her voice calm and authoritative. "She wants us to feel alone. But we are not. We are a family, and families protect each other." David, the quiet protector, found his gentle strength amplified by Emma's pragmatic leadership. He was the anchor, the emotional heart that kept hope alive, while Emma was the strategic mind, navigating the labyrinthine complexities of law and human nature. Their partnership was a seamless dance of complementary strengths, his deep empathy, her hard-won wisdom. He ensured the community's spirit remained unbroken, while she tirelessly dismantled Sterling's legal edifice, brick by painstaking brick. He saw in Emma not a damaged wanderer, but a phoenix, risen from the ashes of her past, now wielding her scars as badges of honor, her failures as lessons learned. And in his quiet strength, Emma found a different kind of healing, a realization that vulnerability, when shared, could be the most powerful bond of all. The legal battle stretched on, a draining marathon under the unforgiving Arizona sun. Sterling's lawyers hurled injunctions and cease and desist orders. Her public relations team spun narratives of illegal squatters and environmental damage. But each attack was met with a united front. The community, inspired by Emma's courage and David's steadfastness, turned the tide. They reached out to sympathetic journalists, sharing their story of resilience, of building hope from the dust. They leveraged indigenous land rights, showcasing the deep historical and spiritual connection to the land that Sterling's corporate ambition could never comprehend. Emma, understanding the power of narrative, helped them craft their own story, a counter-narrative of community, sustainability, and the profound human need for belonging. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, Sterling's relentless assault began to falter. The legal filings became less frequent, the threats less potent. Public opinion, once swayed by Sterling's polished propaganda, began to shift, stirred by the raw honesty of the settlement story. The sheer, unyielding resilience of the community, Emma's strategic brilliance, and David's unwavering hope had created a bulwark that even Sterling's vast wealth and influence could not breach. She had sought to break their spirit, but instead she had only forged it stronger, tempered it in the fires of adversity. The legal system, though slow, eventually recognized the undeniable truth. This was not a transient encampment. It was a home built on legitimate claims and, more importantly, on the unshakable foundation of human connection and collective will. One day, the last legal notice arrived, not a threat but a concession. Catherine Sterling, defeated not by a courtroom verdict but by the sheer, indomitable spirit of a united people, had withdrawn her claims. Her empire, built on acquisition and intimidation, had finally met its match in a small, resilient community in the heart of Monument Valley. The news rippled through the settlement, not with triumphant shouts, but with a profound, quiet sense of peace. The battle was over. The home was safe. In the days that followed, the settlement truly blossomed. It was no longer a temporary refuge, but a permanent sanctuary, a beacon of hope against the vast, indifferent desert. Emma, standing beside David, watched the community thrive. Children played freely, their laughter echoing off the red rock formations. Gardens flourished, fed by ingenious water systems Emma had helped design. The once broken souls who had sought shelter here now walked with a newfound purpose, their scars becoming symbols of survival, not shame. Emma no longer felt the burning brand of Canyon Ridge. The weight of her past was still there, a solemn reminder, but it no longer crushed her. Instead, it had become the very wisdom that allowed her to lead, to protect, to connect. She had learned to carry its weight, not by fleeing, but by facing it, by transforming it into strength. Her overconfidence had taught her humility. Her isolation had taught her the profound power of community. Her guilt had taught her the liberating strength of truth. She had risked failure again, but this time she had risked it for something truly worth fighting for, and in doing so had found not just redemption, but a home, a purpose, and a family. Journey, the faithful border collie, still padded silently beside her, a constant reminder of the mysterious path that had led her from desolation to destiny. David, his eyes reflecting the vast, hopeful expanse of the Monument Valley sky, squeezed Emma's hand. He had built a refuge for broken souls, and in Emma, he had found his own salvation, a partner whose damaged past had prepared her for their most crucial victory. The wind whispered through the red rocks, carrying not echoes of loss, but promises of a future they would build together, in a place where wounded spirits could find restoration, and where genuine healing proved that our greatest failures often prepare us for our most crucial triumphs.